Hello, welcome. I am Merikay Smith and I lead the Seneca Creek Watershed Partners. Today, I'd like to talk to you about pollinators and what you can do, what I can do, what each of us can do to help the pollinators around us. And specifically, we'll focus on pollinators for the mid-Atlantic and where we live. All right, so why did I choose a photo of a magnolia to start off with? Well, to remind us that the plants and insects that are native here have very long histories. It turns out that native magnolias evolved about 90 million years ago, and that was even before bees had evolved. So these early flowers were pollinated by beetles, and you still can find today that magnolia blooms are pollinated by beetles. So it's a reminder that when we bring in a lot of non-native plants, we're disrupting these natural relationships that have evolved over very long periods of time. In this talk, I'm going to share about pollinators, the different pollinators from our area. There's a lot of really interesting information about pollinators. And then why we want to have less lawn and more native plants and how that relates to caring for our pollinators. Third, I'm going to spend some time to talk about what exactly are native plants, how do you define that, and how do you select them for your garden. And finally, we'll talk about some exceptional native plants that are hosts for pollinators as well as provide pollen and nectar. Without pollinators, the web of life unravels. About 85% of flowering plants need pollinators, and 2/3 of humans' food crops need pollinators. In addition, besides the fruits, vegetables, and seeds we derive from the pollination, it turns out the insects and animals themselves that are pollinators are a key source of food for many other animals. So it is essential for us to protect our pollinators. I share this photo from Sam Droege because it's a beautiful image, but also often we have a negative feeling about wasps because of our association with yellow jackets that sting, but many wasps are extremely beneficial both as pollinators and in other ways. In this example, it's a parasitizing wasp. So here's how they serve us. This other photo is from my garden. There's a hornworm that would like to eat my tomato plants, but instead it will be eaten by the larva of this wasp that has parasitized it by laying its eggs on the caterpillar. So this is doing me a favor, saves me from needing to directly kill the caterpillar. So often there are these relationships between various insects and animals that when you're not using herbicides and pesticides, and you've got a healthy environment with diverse plants, then you have both predators and prey, and they keep in balance, and you don't need to use chemical pesticides. This slide from the Xerxes website reminds us why we should care about our pollinators. About 1/3 of the bumblebee species are in decline, and nearly 20% of the United States butterflies are at risk of extinction. That's about 1/5 at risk of extinction. We've got 50% or half of the leafcutter bees and about 1/3 of our mason bees also at risk. Then other insects like the ladybugs are being displaced by invasive species. So it is definitely a time for us to be aware of and concerned for our pollinators. This slide shows the beautiful monarch butterfly. These photos are from my garden. It also shows the contrasting viceroy. It has the extra black band at the lower hind wings. All right, you know about the spectacular flights that the monarchs do, migrating thousands of miles on an annual basis using multiple generations of butterflies. it's fascinating, and I would suggest you look up and read and watch videos about this. But since I don't have time to do more, I just want to point out that in my lifetime, the butterflies population have dropped about 97%, which means there's only about 3% of this butterfly left compared to when I was a child. And even just this past year, those remaining butterflies dropped by about 22% in terms when you measure the winter habitat that they take up in Mexico. So this is a trend that's gone downward and continues downward. And on this pattern, there will not be many years left when we have monarchs. So what can you do? Well, in our area, you can plant the common milkweed. It grows very easily. In fact, in my garden, it just showed up uninvited, and I let it stay, and then have since spread the seeds to encourage it to grow. But it's a plant that this time of year has the flowers that you see in these photos, and attracts many other pollinators as well for the pollen and nectar, both bumblebees, regular honeybees, butterflies. But specifically, we're growing it so that we have the milkweed here for the monarch butterfly to lay its eggs, so she has a place when she comes to lay her eggs and have the next generation. The larvae eat the milkweed, which includes a protective cardiac glycoside that makes this butterfly unpalatable to its predators and allows it to survive. Interestingly, the photo on the lower left shows another type of milkweed often sold in our area, Asclepias tuberosa. It will attract butterflies and bees for its nectar, but in my reading, I've learned that that plant does not have as much protective cardiac glycosides in it, and also has much smaller leaves, so it's less preferred by the monarch as a place to lay eggs. So although it's fine as an attractive garden plant, it's not going to fulfill the role of providing for the next generation of monarchs, as well as just the common milkweed will do. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about why the pollinators are dying and what you can do about it. We've got habitat loss. Millions of acres per year in the United States are lost. The alteration of what habitat remains, and in large area, is that is the impact of native plants, of invasive plants that are taking over areas and supplanting them, and then the fragmentation of what habitat remains. We've got the pesticide and herbicide use of humans, climate change, and it's not just the change in average temperatures, but it's the extreme weather events, drought, excess rain, tornadoes, extreme temperatures, highs and lows. All of these things, along with the shifts in timing so that the interrelationship between plants and insects and animals are disrupted. All of these are pressures against the populations of pollinators. And then finally, there are introduced diseases and pests. And so what are some of the things we can do? Well, and this second segment of the slide comes from the Xerxes Society. We can plant native plants to provide food for our pollinators. We can provide nesting sites, and I've got more details about that on another slide. We can avoid using pesticides. And this last is really important. We can advocate for pollinators. And this, it doesn't matter whether you have a very large 10-acre yard or you got 10 square feet at the back of a you know, like on a patio or something in an apartment. You can still be a very influential advocate on behalf of pollinators, working with your city, government, county, state to have good laws and policies that protect our insects. You can also volunteer with groups. I'd obviously advocate for volunteering with whatever your local watershed groups are, because if we can have healthy watersheds and protect the habitat there, you're doing a significant thing to protect pollinators as well as all other wildlife. So what are some of the pollinators? This picture shows some bees. I happen to be a honeybee keeper. I've got a hive, and I had brought, for some reason, I don't remember why I brought that into the house full of bees. Anyway, there are honeybees, but they're not native here. But we have many other native, in fact, about 500 native bees for Maryland. We've got many different types of butterflies and moths, wasps, beetles, flies like syrphid flies, and others that are beneficial and do pollinating. There are bats and even some birds that will pollinate, but it's the insects that do the bulk of the work, especially the bees. Bees are the only pollinators who deliberately gather pollen to bring it back to their nests, except for just a few wasps. It's the bees that do that. Otherwise, pollinators like the butterflies, they're going after the nectar, and they become pollinators only incidentally, almost like accidental pollinators, when pollen might attach to them and be carried to other flowers. Whereas bees' bodies are specifically designed to collect the pollen, and they take it back and use it in their hives or in their nests if they're solitary bees. I wanted to share this photo, another from Sam Droege, and to remind you that he's a great resource of photographs of bees in our area. And here's a website that you could go to learn more about the Mid-Atlantic region native bees from Sam Droege. Anyway, this is a sweat bee. They're very small. They're darling, and this I chose to show as the way bees can collect pollen. They'll have a scopa, a small sort of like pocket area on their legs that they can collect pollen, but often the pollen also attaches to the hairs, of which they have many across their bodies. Bees have flower constancy, which means they'll visit the same species of flower on a foraging trip. So a female bee might visit hundreds of flowers in one trip, all of the same type, and transfer pollen along the way. This is important in terms of being an effective pollinator of the plants. So again, the sort of accidental pollinators, the butterflies and some of the flies, other pollinators, they might flit from one type of plant to another, and so making them less efficient in terms of providing benefits to the plants in pollinating the same species. So, according to Sam Droege, there are about 500 different species of native bees in Maryland. They're divided among 5 families. There are the honeybees, which of course again are not native, but they are present here. Bumblebees. Then we've got the sweat bees, miner bees, leafcutter and mason bees, and the plasterer bees. So I'd encourage you to look outside in your garden and other natural areas near you to see what bees you can find. And this is just a photo of a few of the bees in my garden. It's interesting, about 90% of bees are solitary. And female solitary bees will construct their nests in different ways. Some use abandoned beetle burrows or tunnel into wood in branches or standing dying trees. They can chew out a nest within the pith of stems and twigs. And about 70% nest in the ground, digging tunnels in bare or sparsely vegetated soil. So that impacts the way we garden. In our garden, I like to use branches that have come down in storms, or I might rescue from neighbors and use them to put around the edges of my garden beds. So here you see a bed that's full of a lot of native plants. Would be a great place for pollinators, but it's also, so you can see the holes here in the log where it has become a nesting site for pollinators. And the lower photos, those are from the xerces.org website, and they show bees that are using the interior pith areas of stems as a nursing area where they can lay their eggs and have the young larvae live. So by having stems or branches, logs, as well as standing dead trees, we can provide habitat as also just bare land, bare soil, loose bare soil. You are helping out your pollinators. You might read about having a bee motel, hotel, condo, and that's where you have a human-made structure that's got a lot of bundled stems or wood that's been drilled into, pre-drilled with the holes to make homes, nesting areas. Unfortunately, these can be a place where there's a greater chance for diseases as well as for predators to congregate. So it's actually better for the bees that are nesting if it's done in a more natural way and that their nests are scattered throughout your garden area. Solitary bees, I've put the word solitary in quotes because often they'll nest in large groups. For example, around 200 female bees might nest in a square yard of ground, but they'll each have their own individual burrow and their own brood cells. Large carpenter bees are interesting. They can live long enough that the female might be able to share her nest with her adult offspring. So why do we want less lawn? Of course, it's because it then opens up space for having native plants. And when we have less lawn, we also tend to have fewer herbicides and fertilizers used. We create less pollution because we're not burning fossil fuels to cut or mow the plants. We're protecting our stormwater, our local streams, by reducing stormwater runoff because other plants generally are much better at holding water. They'll have more stem area, leaf area, and root area than is the case for turf grass. And finally, and most importantly, when we have less lawn and we've got more native plants, we're supporting life, including the pollinators. So these photos celebrate some of the creatures that I enjoy seeing in my garden, including in the center an eastern box turtle, which used to be extremely common but now are rare to find in our community. And I love that we have a lot of different toads and frogs, as well as our pollinators enjoying my garden. And here's just some additional butterfly pictures in the far right bottom. That's a silk moth, Promethea silk moth in our garden. This is the front walkway area. It used to just be lawn, and now there's a variety of plants. The more variety you have in your plants, the better in terms of the pollinators. And if you can have swaths of plants, so you have multiple of the same type of plant, so it's not just one plant, that's helpful to the pollinators. And these photos are from just that entry area of birds, insects, skink, frog, snake. Of course, you can see those are on the asphalt driveway next to that entry area. So a great diversity, and it's fun to have that in the garden, and it's beneficial. So there was an article that received a lot of attention in the New York Times in 2018. The insect apocalypse is here. I don't know if you saw that, but you might want to look it up. And from it, we've learned, along with additional studies, about the declines in the insect biodiversity across the world. A more recent publication in Science News, April 2020, showed that the declines are complex and that it's impacting both land-based but also freshwater insects. So across the board, they're finding about 25% loss over the past 30 years, which continuing at that rate is not sustainable. This particular photo shows in the center a sunflower. They're native to our area, and a reminder that plants are the energy source for all life. And insects are often an important translator for that energy up to other trophic levels. So don't be disturbed in your garden if you see a variety of insects, and they're often beneficial, doing good things. And even the ones that you might consider pests, like caterpillars eating the leaves, if you leave them alone and you've got a nice variety of native plants in your garden, you'll have good predators that'll keep populations in control, and it's quite rare that you'll actually lose a plant from insect predation. Dr. Talamy of the University of Delaware, an entomologist, has done studies that compare native to non-native landscaping. And in this case, they looked at 12 properties with an equal total plant diversity. But in half of the properties, they were non-native plants, and the other half, they were native. And not too surprisingly, they found significantly more abundance, diversity, and breeding pairs on the properties with the native plants. And with the birds, they found of regional conservation concern 8 times more abundant and diverse in the landscaping for the birds. This photo of the eastern meadowlark is a reminder, like pollinators, also many of the populations of our birds are dropping, of the native birds. And in this case, we have lost 73% of the eastern meadowlarks. And that, again, is a statistic from the National Audubon Society from bird counts that started about the time I was a child and have continued. And so just in the span of one human lifetime, which is nothing relative to the millions of years that birds have been on the earth, we're seeing tremendous loss of population. But we can do something to help slow this down, and that is planting native plants. Dr. Talamy's graduate students did a study to count the caterpillars required for one nest of Carolina chickadees. These cute little birds require between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to feed their one nest of young, which is typically 4 baby birds. So that's a lot of caterpillars. So if on your property you want to have nesting chickadees, you need to be able to provide in that area enough food for those young to survive and fledge. Now let's talk a little bit about that. One example, because there's just such huge variation between the native and non-native trees, and trees are excellent for providing the mass of foliage required to have the caterpillar count to feed the birds. So native dogwoods, the Cornus florida, supports 117 species of moths and butterflies. But the Cornus cusa, which is the Asian dogwood, supports 0, none. So while it will have leaves that never are chewed by insects, it also means they're not providing that benefit of being a host to moths and butterflies. Another thing this picture illustrates is in this neighborhood, it's the back corner of 4 different properties which is really great. They've got large predominantly native trees. You've got the native understory trees, and they've reduced the areas of lawn. And even better will be over time as they replace some of these smaller plants that are the shrubs and perennials with natives. Because it turns out, in order to support bird populations, again from studies done by Dr. Talamy, that you need about 70 to 75% native plants by volume. So for example, obviously, like 1 oak is not equal to the same as 1 milkweed in terms of the volume of plant material. But in a general way, when you look at your landscaping, you'd ideally find that about 3/4 of it is native. And these photos are all from our garden. Then if you do have that, then you've got the possibility of being able to support nesting birds and birds of more variety in the species that are there. Including, in this case, we have a hawk that likes to hang out in our yard, and it's there because it can find things to eat. Our gardens and the other properties we might have influence over represent the last chance we have for sustaining plants and animals that were once common. I highly encourage you to look at some of Dr. Talamy's talks that he's given, as well as reading some of the books. He's published multiple books on the topic of native plants and ways to incorporate them in our home landscapes. And the most recent book he's done is on the native oaks. It's a marvelous book. So each of us can do what we can, and we can help the pollinators and the other animals so that they can continue to live. So what is a native plant? Well, generally they're defined as plants that would grow in an area, would have grown in the area before the European colonists arrived. And this photo shows the side garden of our property. When I initially started planting, when we moved here about 20 years ago, the property we bought was almost entirely lawn, 2 acres of lawn. The white pines here are the perimeter. They're planted at the border of the property. And otherwise it was all lawn. And initially I planted what was attractive and available for sale in the nursery trade. And as a result, because I didn't know better, as is the case for many people, as a result, when you look at this, it's almost entirely non-native plants, so not particularly beneficial for habitat. I have the Japanese beautiful cherry trees. I've got the crepe myrtles, very commonly grown here. And you know, they have names. They're often named after Native American tribes. But despite that name, those plants are actually native to India and Asia. They're not North American, so you cannot go by the names of the plants. Another, and here I've got like the Chinese silvergrass. That's actually invasive, so I've had to pull that out. I didn't know that when I planted it. And here's a viburnum, the name Allegheny. So you definitely would presume that's a North American plant. But no, it's a cross of a European viburnum and an Asian viburnum. So this slide is to remind you that it's sort of a buyer beware. It's helpful when you're buying your plants that before you do so, you do a little bit of search online to see what the genetics are, because you can't go by the name, and you can't even go by the fact that it might be at a native plant store or have a tag on it that says native. I've learned from experience that it's best to check, because often those tags and names are misleading, sadly. Okay, but then, so what I did is, among other things, so like I said, I removed the invasive Chinese silvergrass. I took out that viburnum. I now in my garden have a native viburnum. It's Viburnum dentatum. It has these lovely little blooms. They're not too dramatic, but they're attractive to the pollinators, and then they set berries that are present through the fall, which are helpful for the birds. It has nice fall color, so in many ways it's a more attractive plant than the Allegheny. I've also started adding other plants, shrubs, and perennials that are native. And one thing I've learned in the process is you have a lot of plants that you might consider as being kind of like near native. So for example, the oak leaf hydrangea here and the blue star Amsonia Hubrichtii, they are both native to North America and even eastern North America, but they are not native to Maryland. Though I still think they're good plants for our gardens, and they do provide for pollinators in our area. But in an ideal world, you might even find plants that are native specific to Maryland. I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between a cultivated variety and a straight species of plants. So looking at these hibiscus, which are native to our area, in the photo on the left, we have a cultivated variety named Fireball. Now, when it's a cultivated variety, it could be a cross that would be a plant not found in nature, or it could be a native plant that had a particularly attractive either flower or foliage, or there's something about it that someone decided it was market worthy, and so they have a trademark on it, and they are selling clones of that native plant under a trademark name. And in which case they're as beneficial as a plant that's without a cultivated name that's a straight species. So this is a little more information maybe than you want, but it helps if you know from the get-go that these details. It will help you select the plants that will be more beneficial in terms of habitat for your garden. And we're so lucky here because look how beautiful these plants are. You know, the bee balm there in the back, by its name, you can tell the bees love the monardas. There's various species of monardas native to our area. The hibiscus, there's many different forms of that are available for the garden. But look, the straight species of this plant is gorgeous with a bright fire engine red color, and I highly recommend it. Another great plant for pollinators that really draws in both bees and butterflies is this Agastock. There are many different forms of Agastockies too, the family of Agastocki. They're different species, but one that's common in the nursery trade is Blue Fortune. Okay, so I have that growing in my garden, but it's native to North America, but it's not native to Maryland. I now have this giant hyssop. It has yellow blooms growing in my garden because I've learned that it is native to Maryland. And one of the ways I knew about that is from this website, Maryland Biodiversity Project, where you can get plant lists and animal lists of things that are local to native to our area, as well as information about invasive plants and animals. If you can work with your neighbors, you can greatly enhance the benefit of the plantings you do. You see in this photo example D, the 4 neighbors are working together to create a continuous corridor for the wildlife. This is very beneficial, especially if that then connects to like a park or other area that's got native plants. Because for many animals, they require more space than what would be available just in one property to have allocated to native plants. So again, this is an opportunity to get to know your neighbors and work together on something important. I'm going to now talk about a few of the really great plants that we have, are host plants to butterflies. The spice bush butterfly, lovely butterfly, as well as the Prometheus silk moth, both rely on the spice bush shrub, the Lindera benzoin, and that is a shrub that's very commonly found in our woodlands and something you could grow in a home garden. The zebra swallowtail butterfly requires pawpaws as plants, host plant for its young. So that's a great small tree to grow in the garden. If you have several that are not genetically related, they can cross-pollinate and you have fruit, which is delicious. It tastes sort of like vanilla custard. Another way you can increase the benefit of your property to wildlife and pollinators is to have water available. You might not think about it, but pollinators, like us, need to drink water. And so having water, and also like plants or something that they can land on, that they can safely get the water without drowning, is important. It could be as simple as a dish, but you'll need to dump it out regularly and refill it every day or two so that it stays clean and you don't get mosquitoes. Or you could have a small pond, and as long as you've got some goldfish there, they'll eat any mosquito larvae. A small pond like this has great benefits for lots of different types of wildlife, but pollinators also need access to fresh water, and it's ideal if there are plants that they can land on, so they can land on these lily pads and get water. Also, you can surround the area with native plants to maximize your impact. And you'll see here in the case of this lily that it is actually being pollinated by a small syrphid fly. So I'll have to say one of the things I enjoy most in our garden are the ponds. And if you've got small little goldfish in there, they're eating the mosquito larvae, and you're likely to find you've got tadpoles, frogs, and toads coming into your garden too, and that is great. Some excellent sources of information on native plants are the Maryland Native Plant Society. The website is mdflora.org. Also, this publication by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on native plants for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. It's available online and as well as in print form. It gives lists of different types by type of trees, understory trees, shrubs, perennials, ground covers, grasses, ferns. So it's a great source of information. And remember, the more diverse your native plants, the more diverse the pollinators are that you're supporting. Some real standout plants for pollinators I'm going to share. These are from a study done by Penn State where they compared 88 native perennials, and these are top 3. Goldenrods. Any of the goldenrod species are really great for attracting insects. And one thing that's particularly nice is they bloom in the fall, a time when often nectar pollen supplies are low for bees. And I would recommend for a home garden something like this on the bottom left, Fireworks. It's available in the nursery trade. The common filled goldenrod I have grown in my garden, but I find it is too aggressive. I have 2 acres, so I can kind of handle it there, but even there it's almost too much. So a smaller garden is not a good choice. But there are good goldenrods for smaller areas. Joe Pyeweed, wonderful plant. This photo is from my garden, and there were like 15 butterflies at one instant when I took this. So I can believe when they saw that on the plants there were 17 butterflies in 2 minutes. And it had 30 different insect visitors in that same time period. So again, there are various species that are available for our area and different cultivars of those. And the one that in this particular study was chosen as being the very best herbaceous for pollinator is the clustered mountain mint, because it has the longest of bloom time of the 88 plants that they tested, 10 weeks. It actually also happens to smell wonderful. Smells like mint, of course, when you touch it. It was #1 for pollinator diversity and insect visitors. It had 78 insects in 2 minutes. And I see that in my garden. You know, it's absolutely covered by native plants when it's in bloom. You see hundreds of different insects when you have a good sized swath of this plant. And although it's somewhat aggressive, since it's in the mint family, most mints are aggressive, because it grows right at the surface, it's very easy to pull and keep in control. And then when you pull a plant, the roots stay intact, and it's easy to pass on to friends or to plant in another part of your garden. Another excellent plant here is, you see the beard's tongue with the bumblebee climbing in. When you're choosing your plants, you need to think in terms of getting the right plant in the right place. The correct amount of sun or shade, dry, normal, or wet soil. You want to know something about the growth habit, whether the plant's aggressive or wimpy, or in between, when it blooms, the color of the blooms, and as I mentioned earlier, to have multiple plants if possible for your pollinators. So this beard tongue, the Penstemon digitalis, is a really great choice in the garden. I found in both my home garden and other gardens I've helped with that it grows very easily, comes back year to year. It will naturalize, and you can save the seeds and toss them out into other areas and spread it, but it doesn't spread on its own very much. So really great choice. It's deer resistant. It likes full sun, but it will tolerate shade. And it happens to host the Chalcedon checker spot. And there's another Penstemon, the Penstemon hirsutus, that is also native to our area. It is a host for the Baltimore checker spot, which is the Maryland state butterfly. Although I'll have to say I have never seen that particular butterfly in my garden. So I guess that's why I need to buy more of and plant the Penstemon hirsutus, because I only have the foxglove type. Anyway, it's interesting. Another choice, Lobelia cardinalis. This is a great plant to bring in hummingbirds if you like to watch hummingbirds. And it also is a host to the spicebush swallowtail and many other butterflies and moths in our area. But that's only true for the straight species of the Lobelia cardinalis. If you get The cultivated varieties which have been altered to have dark leaves, those tend not to be supportive of the native butterflies in terms of being host plants for their larvae. Another choice, Pachyra aurea, golden ragwort, is lovely. It blooms in the spring early, so that's good for the early pollinators. But it's an aggressive spreader, so it's a better choice for a larger garden than a small garden. But if you've got the space, it's great because it's evergreen, which means that it suppresses weeds, is there over the winter, and therefore the weeds don't grow in. It supports many different types of bees and also syrphid flies, so it's a very excellent choice for pollinators. And it's interesting, the syrphid flies, and I believe that in this photo in the center is a syrphid fly, they actually eat aphids, so besides being a pollinator, they're helpful with eating the pests. Baptisia australis and the yellow baptisia are both great pollinator plants. They bring in bees. The bumblebees love this when it's in bloom, but this is also a host plant to the wild indigo dusky winged butterfly, the eastern-tailed blue, orange sulfur, and clouded sulfur, as well as the frosted elfin and hoary edge. So a lot of different butterflies use this plant. And it's very attractive, easy to grow, has a very deep taproot, so is drought resistant once it's established. It likes sun. It doesn't like to be moved, so try to choose a place where it can stay. Echinacea, very beautiful plant that the butterflies love, as well as the bumblebees and other bees. It is the host to the silvery checker spot, and is just a plant that is a pleasure to have in your garden. I chose to share this photo because with a name like ironweed, I would assume most people would choose not to plant this. And especially after you read that it grows 4 to 6 feet tall. But I'll have to say, in my garden, I've grown it for about 12 years, and it has not spread very much. I have had it grow on just 3 spots, and so I really am happy that it's there because it's tall and provides flowers late in the fall at a time when there are fewer flowers available. So I would highly recommend this as an option. Now let's talk a little bit about shrubs, because a single shrub can provide thousands of blooms, and so in ways beyond what a single pollinator perennial is able to do. So this photo is from a friend, Master Gardener Leanne Galletley. It shows 3 really good native shrubs. The spice bush on the left, which, as we talked about earlier, is the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail and the Promethea silk moth. Then the white blooming shrub on the right is the fothergilla. That attracts both bees and butterflies in the spring, and it is a little bit later in its bloom, like April. It's very nectar-rich bloom, so that's a great choice to have. And it has lovely fall color too. And then inkberry, which is evergreen, it attracts bees and butterflies. Humans, we don't probably notice the flowers. They're quite small, inconspicuous flowers, but the pollinators do benefit from them. They provide a lot of honey. In fact, people who have honeybees often specifically seek to have these plants near their hives. And it's the host to the Henry's elfin butterfly. Serviceberry, another great choice. There are about 28 native serviceberries to North America, and they all set fruit that is available to birds and other wildlife and humans. They can be used to make jam. It likes rich, moist soil, sun to part shade, and is a good garden plant. If you want to know more about hydrangeas, the wild hydrangeas, native hydrangeas, there's a recent report out by Mount Cuba Center, and it's worth knowing that Mount Cuba Center in Delaware is a large native plant center, and they do research where they will take a particular family of plants, like the hydrangea, and they'll plant an entire garden of many different species and cultivated varieties, and then they will grow them for 3 years and have regular weekly visits to note disease problems and pests and how many and what type of pollinator visits there are and so on. And then they publish these reports. It's very helpful when you're choosing plants to look at their reports, and they have reports on many different native plants, but most recently they've done one on hydrangeas. You know, and often when you think of hydrangeas, you might think of the mop head hydrangeas, which are not native to our area. Well, I should say the ones that are typically sold in the nurseries are not necessarily native, and they don't support pollinators because those flowers are sterile. There's no pollen, there's no nectar, so there's no reason for pollinators to come to these plants, and their leaves are not edible to them. But we have lovely native hydrangeas, including the lace cap hydrangeas, and they're more beneficial. These are the flowers that have pollen and nectar and bring in the butterflies. I took this picture at River Farm, as well as this photo, and I love the oak leaf hydrangea. It's such a beautiful plant, and fall color, the leaves turn a pretty red, and when you look at the blooms up close, what you learn is the outer showy white flowers, which are sterile, the bees are not visiting. But if you look below them, there's little tiny flowers, and your plant's likely to, this time of year, be completely covered, by dozens and dozens of bees, native as well as honeybees, visiting this plant. Buttonbush. This is a really fun plant. It takes a few years to grow before it's mature enough to set these flowers, in my experience. But once it's a little bit more mature and able to have the flowers, it's lovely. It likes to have moist soil, wet soil, but it really attracts the butterflies. You'll have nearly a butterfly for every flower. And it also happens to be a host plant for many different types of large moths. So a really great choice. Winterberry is dioecious, which means you need both a male and a female plant. It blooms in the late spring. The flowers are not particularly conspicuous, but they are beneficial to the pollinators, and then the berries that are set are beneficial to the birds, and it's the host for Henry's elfin butterfly. Now, let's just summarize what we've learned about pollinator-friendly practices. I found this from the U.S. Forest Service. Plant native plants, because they are going to be beneficial to pollinators in a way that non-native plants are not. You can plant a variety of plants and in large swaths, and try to use different colors and shapes to bring in a diverse number and types of pollinators. Choose pollinator plants that are hosts for the larvae of particular butterflies that are native to your area. You can help pollinators by leaving open ground and stems or branches or logs that they can use for nests. This particular site recommended building a bee condo, but from what I have read, or they sometimes call them bee hotels, bee motels, this is actually not such a great idea, because by having, it's essentially the idea of taking stems or blocks of wood and drilling holes in it, and then having lots of bees be able to use that space for nests. But it, over time, can be attract predators that know that that's a good place to come and eat young bees as they emerge. Or the other thing is that diseases can build up and be spread. So instead, do like we talked about in this talk, which is create natural environments for your pollinators to nest in. And then avoid modern hybrids that have been altered to the degree where they're no longer providing pollen and nectar or host opportunities for your pollinators. So if you do that, you will be doing your part to help protect the pollinators and in turn be protecting us. Because again, as a reminder, we rely 2/3 of our food for humans comes from pollinated plants. And then beyond that, around 85% of all plants rely on pollinators. So without the pollinators, the whole ecosystems around us would support the life, not just for us, but for other animals, would disappear. So we definitely need individually to do our part, because we're currently on a path, if people continue to treat natural and the natural world around us in the way we currently are, things do not look good for even in the next 20 or 30 years. This is not something that's we're talking about hundreds of years out, but in the time frame of plants that have been around for millions of years and insects and animals that have been around for millions of years, we are doing in essentially a time span of the blink of an eye, creating disasters. So we need to slow that down, do what we can, and we can do a lot of good. And again, reminder, we'd love for you to help with Seneca Creek Watershed Partners, or whatever watershed you live in. There are many ways that you can not feel depressed about the state of the world, but instead meet interesting and caring people who are actively involved in protecting our environment. And you can work where you live in terms of caring for pollinators. Thank you.